mother and their father, and this client was playing in the garden. The father looked out of the window and called her in. She was disobedient, she didn't come. The father shot himself, the mother, and all the other children. She avoided being shot by being disobedient. So her trauma was, in a few seconds, her whole family was annihilated. And the therapist's problem was, in the face of this annihilation, what is possible to move forwards? But the client was alive, she had survived, she had guilt. So I don't know if this is related to your question, but here is a massive problem. The whole of your childhood is wiped out in 3 minutes. And yet somehow life moved forwards, and whether one can find a meaning in what happened, but maybe one has to find a meaning in being alive. So we can meet extreme experiences, people who have been tortured, and somehow in the face of, let's take an example from the concentration camps. This is a second-hand story, but an important one, and I use it from time to time in groups. A girl of 10, a little older than this other girl, did not survive. She died in one of the concentration camps, but she kept a diary, and this diary survived. And in the diary she said, every day I look out of the window and I see a tree, and this tree reminds me of the value of being alive. So somehow in the most extreme situations that we can imagine, more extreme than any client is actually in, because a client is free to come to a session and go out again, and this girl was not. So more extreme situations than any client is currently in, and this extraordinary thing to do with how to, and she had not had therapy, this girl. She just was able to contact a source of value and sustain herself with that in the face of a total inhumanity. That's a very strong soul. And what we're trying to do in our therapeutic work is help people who have lived through bad experiences, sometimes very traumatic experiences, to contact the strength of their soul, which transcends the immensity of the pain.
Do you think there's such a thing as madness, or sanity for that matter?
Silva and I were at a congress a few years back called the Wahnsinn der Normalität, the madness of normality. Sanity comes from Greek sano, sana, health. So if we take the words at the first level, sanity is to do with what we just talked about with ideas, clarity of ideas connected to clarity of your emotional contact with yourself, and madness is the opposite. So a psychosis is then a fragmentation, a deep loss of contact with yourself and with other people. So in that sense, madness is real and sanity is real. But we must avoid splitting the world into two halves, because the maddest person has seeds of sanity in him, and any of the sane people put in extreme situations could start to behave and feel mad. So that's the first aspect. Then lots of things which are called normal or even sane in the political, social field are actually mad. But they are defended as rationalized and defended, and people think this is okay. So there are lots of crazy actions happening which are defended in the name of religion or of a political system and so on. And I gave the example in our conference of a psychotic woman who was treated by a therapist in Norway. And she had all the classical symptoms of madness. She was treated in various ways, but the essence of her treatment was a good body psychotherapy. And a key moment in her journey was seeing an apple on the shelf of the therapist, and the therapist was noticing her head gestures looking towards this apple, and eventually the therapist offered her the apple to eat. And she remembers the act of eating the apple as a bridge between madness and sanity, the moment when she could feel maybe a taste of health. So the apple became a symbol of hope, many levels, many life feels in the apple. There's the apple as a symbol, there's the apple as something you can eat. You move the jaw to eat the apple. The apple has a taste, you perhaps breathe differently eating the apple. The apple was a contact moment in her relationship, and the apple changed her value systems to thinking the world tastes good. So here was a movement from within a mad woman to the sanity of her experience, and at the end of her process she was a sane lady teaching the doctors in a mad clinic what madness has been about.
How important do you think it is to have knowledge of the evolution of therapeutic practice, Freud, Jung, Reich and so on, in order to be an effective healer or therapist in the present?
Well, two parts of the answer. First, I am somebody extremely interested in origins. I study and am fascinated by origins at all levels. Origins of one's own life, in the roots in childhood, which is the interest of every therapist. Origin in the therapeutic systems. I take them back much further than anybody else, because I go back to the Greek roots and so on. Origins of families, genealogically. I'm very interested in origins. I think the main effect of looking at the origins of therapeutic systems on actual therapy is understanding the mistakes or the blind points. For example, Freud worked with lying down on the mattress, and he used to sit behind the client's head where the client couldn't see him, and he would encourage closing your eyes and remembering your history and your flow of unconscious. This has many, many good points. Lie down, relax, close the eyes, go in. So there are many things which this psychoanalytic method gave not only to psychoanalysis but to other methods. And the Reichian therapy, when it started, was starting lying down. But Reich was much more interested than Freud was in the contact within the session between the two people. So Reich encouraged a lot of the time to have the eyes open, where feelings could be shown through the eyes. And not doing that in the Freudian work was at a certain point a blindness to the other. But then Reich always worked lying down, and lying down also has enormous advantages and enormous disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is that lying down tends to regress the client, and regression is not always valuable. And then came Alexander Lowen and said we should stand up. So then came a whole tradition of standing in therapy, and every client should begin standing. And this was fine for some and not fine for others because of the polarity principle. So part of studying the history of therapeutic systems is looking at the strong points they developed